Now, there is a battle that is looming and it's going to cost you more money. It's a battle between the federal government and the Reserve Bank about what is actually going on in our economy. It all comes back to cost of living and inflation in particular. Now, of course, cost of living, laser-like focus, number one issue in the country. We talk about it each and every day. Now, reality here is that we are seeing there's an awful lot of people that are putting off major purchases at the moment because of how expensive everything else is. As our mates from Turbans for Australia told us the other night in Melbourne, there are people who are going to places to collect free food because they can move that $80 and spend it somewhere else. Well, people currently are putting off seeing a health professional as a result of the cost of living crisis. According to the ABS, 1 in 5 people, or 19.3%, say that cost is one reason for delaying or not seeing a health professional for their mental health when needed. That rose to 16%. As you can see, there is quite the problem here. Now, when you have a look here on this particular graph, I want to show you from everyone over the age of 15, the types of things people are delaying. Now, it doesn't matter whether you are the richest or the poorest, the blue line there is dental. And up to 25% of people who are in significant financial damage, they're putting it off right now. Best part of 20%, slightly higher than that, and even the people who are supposedly the least disadvantaged, they're doing it by about 10 to 15%. But as you can see, medical specialists, prescription medications, going to the GP, after-hours GPs or hospitals, all of them down in terms of people visiting them because of the costs associated. Now, while the reality is that while the federal budget may well be in a surplus, as we've shown you many times, the receipts to prove it, the data behind it, remember, that's what we do, we don't just mouth off, we try to show you the stuff behind the opinion. That we've told you many times before that while the federal budget's going okay, the average household is now in a recession. They've had more than 6 months of their economy, unit by unit, quarter acre by quarter acre, or farm by farm, tightening over the past 6 months, and it's going to get worse, apparently, all the way till the back end of 2025. Which brings us to the great passenger, the man who's already hanging out his shingle to be the next Prime Minister of Australia, Grim Jim, last weekend doing all of the fluffy profiles, saying he doesn't drink anymore because when he did used to drink, he was a bit loose around Parliament House. Please explain. Next question. Now, of course, they have said, this being the federal government, that the reason why we're in the issues that we are currently with inflation, it's all to do with everything overseas. The government has no role whatsoever to play in inflation. Of course, it's not true, but this is their talking point.
Post the Russian invasion of Ukraine as well, that has had an impact on global inflation.
Obviously, the geopolitics and conflict, a war in Europe.
Recovering post-COVID.
Conflict in the Middle East and uncertainty elsewhere, and the Chinese economy, particularly the property sector in China, but more broadly as well.
The Chinese property sector is affecting inflation in Australia. Well, I've called BS on that from the second they started to say it, because it is a political tactic. If they can pretend that everything is cyclical, then nothing is personal. They hold no responsibility. If they can pretend that everything is to do with overseas, then it's none of the decisions that they are making, or more importantly, not making here. Well, I have a strange bedfellow in this argument now, which is the Governor of the Reserve Bank. Now, when you have tension between what the government is doing and the Reserve Bank is doing, we're going to end up in a world of trouble here, where the government continues to be deaf, dumb and blind, and there's only one switch that the Reserve Bank can flick, and that means higher interest rates, which of course feeds back into a whole world of pain that the government will then turn around and say, nothing to see here, not our fault. Remember, they were able to, bizarrely, successfully claim that it was all the former Reserve Bank governor's fault that we've had an elbow dozen of interest rates, 13 overall. You see, they love shifting blame. Remember, what politicians do is more important than what they say. And when the Reserve Bank governor comes out and says, no, it's the issues in this country that are driving inflation, not necessarily everything that's happening overseas.
The remaining inflation challenge we're dealing with is increasingly homegrown and demand-driven.
Now, how do I make this point even clearer? If we go on the monthly numbers that come out from the Bureau of Statistics, let me show you that while the average for overall inflation in the country is 5 and a bit %, there are lots of different things in the economy that are counted as part of inflation that are way higher than 5, way higher than 10. Now, have a look at these. Number one, chief amongst them, petrol. It's why I constantly talk about the need for this government to cut fuel taxes by 25 cents. But OK, we don't make fuel here. It does come in from overseas and it will obviously be affected by oil supply. So, OK, let's take that off the table. Well, what about electricity? The reality is that the reason electricity has gone up, they'll tell you it's all to do with the war in Ukraine. Well, of course, that all depends on us importing things like coal for coal-fired power, but of course we don't, which means the international price is irrelevant and often deals have been done many years in advance. So the reality of why electricity is as high as it is because this government is committed to changing the electricity grid from the one that served us so well into the one that will make them feel better as we bid for things like UN climate conferences in the next few years. OK, that's nothing to do with the rest of the world. Gas and household fuels, again, all here. Transport, again, here. Bread and cereal products, we are not importing an awful lot of those, we make them here, yet they are almost double the rate of national inflation. Insurance and financial services, that, yes, is to do with what happens in this country. Things like youth crime that mean that if you live in a high crime area, you have to pay more for your insurance. If you live in an area that's had floods and fires and all the rest of it, you have to pay more. That, of course, extends across the millions of people who have insurance across the country. So that's something that's absolutely within our borders. We don't import milk or milk-related products. Rent keeps going up because of the number of people that are chasing fewer and fewer homes, including immigration. Tobacco. Now, tobacco, of course, keeps going up because the taxes on it keep going up. Now, Tommy Lee, the world-famous drummer from Motley Crue, he comes to Australia and couldn't believe that to buy a couple of packets of cigarettes, we're going to throw him back the best part of $250. I think he might have been paying with cartons, but you get my point. The reality is that tobacco is not expensive on the other side of the world. It's expensive here because of its taxation. And housing, again, completely irrelevant what the Chinese property market is doing. It keeps going up in terms of inflation because there's fewer houses, more people. That, in part, is what the Reserve Bank Governor was saying. However, the Reserve Bank Governor may want to be careful here because she's going a little bit in the former Optus CEO's direction when she starts to talk about the little indices that are in the economy that are signs that interest rates are not slowing people's spending.
The second indicator of inflation being driven by domestic demand is that it's increasingly underpinned by services. Hairdressers, dentists, dining out, sporting and other recreational activities, the prices of all these services are rising strongly.
Hang on. Inflation? We're not putting up interest rates because the price of a haircut is going up. But let's be serious. One of the reasons why it is because, or any of those services or anything linked back to a business, is because the cost of doing business continually goes up in Australia because your rent keeps going up, or more likely, if you've been able to somehow lock down the rent or you own the commercial property, or maybe even you're working from home, power. You see, there's a direct link between the cost of staying open and the cost that you have to pass on to the customer. When the government is committed to policies that increase the cost of energy, it increases the cost of doing business, which means you have to end up paying more as a result of it. All of it is interlinked. But the government wants to pretend to say, nothing to see here. The other problem, of course, with the Reserve Bank is they only have one thing to do, and that is to put up or to push down interest rates. Now, immediately, to make sure that there is less money moving around the economy to buy things and therefore inflation starts to fall, the idea is to keep pushing them up until people start to tighten their belts. But as we've shown you multiple times, that really only applies to about a third, maybe two-thirds, but definitely only a third of the Australian economy. Because according to the census, again, we show you the data, we show you the receipts, so when you have an argument with your friends, you've got the data to be able to push back on, or just send them the video, skynews.com.au, or send the YouTube out as well. Of course, a third of the country is renting, 35% of the country is currently trying to pay their house off. And I should say, apologies, 31% owned outright. Interest rates don't matter. But 35% who are trying to pay it off, that matters. And presumably to the 30% of people who rent, whose houses, say that 3 times when you're trying to remember everything at once. Those houses, of course, are owned by somebody else and they're trying to pay them back to the bank. So the truth is that the people who are owning their houses outright, well, they don't feel the same pain when it comes to interest rates. Now, if you're one of those people who's worked their ass off and paid their house off, I'm not having a crack at you. It's just the Reserve Bank has no way, for want of a better term, to control your spending. But also, the richer you go up the line, the easier it is to absorb the interest rate rises. But because we live in a society where, as long as I'm in the lifeboat, who cares about anyone else, the rich people keep spending, which means that the problem of spending in the economy keeps going on. Now, again, just because you own a home doesn't mean that you're rich, but think the inner city seats, think the teal seats here. They, in part, are part of the problem.